In the secluded mountains of Montana, a ruthless Mexican cartel believed it had found an easy target, an aging rancher on a remote stretch of land in Ironwood Valley. They never imagined that this simple farmer was Wade Thorne, the most lethal Delta Force commander in U.S. military history. Known in classified circles by his call sign, Phantom, Thorne had led Black Ops missions so secret they never saw daylight. After 30 years of service, he retreated to the quiet rhythms of farm life until the cartel's ambition forced him back into action. What began as idle threats and intimidation would spark a relentless 5-day clash, with Thorne and a handful of allies systematically dismantling the cartel's local operation. Quick pause before we continue. Welcome to Fabled Frames. Please tell us where you are watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe because tomorrow's story is mind-blowing. Hidden deep in the mountains of Montana, Ironwood Valley was the kind of place outsiders rarely noticed. Long plains rolled gently through farmland dotted with aging barns and herds of cattle. Pockets of thick forest gave sanctuary to deer, elk, and black bears. The nearest town was 30 miles away and consisted of little more than a single main street, a sheriff's office, and a combination gas station and grocery store. Cell phone service was spotty. Most folks living in Ironwood Valley had known each other for generations, and they prided themselves on self-reliance. In this quiet corner of the world, Wade Thorne was an unassuming figure. Locals saw him as the rugged, solitary man who'd purchased a modest farm 6 years ago. He lived alone except for a pair of old hunting dogs, Roscoe and Luna, and a handful of cows he kept for personal use. People whispered about his background. He kept to himself, never stirred trouble, and always offered a polite nod or a wave when encountered in town. Yet there was something in his eyes, a hardness that hinted at deep secrets. Younger farmers would sometimes notice how he walked, an almost predatory gait, as if constantly measuring the surroundings. Wade had quietly bought the land shortly after retiring from the U.S. Army. No one knew the specifics of his service, only that it was Special Ops, an umbrella term that was usually enough to dissuade further curiosity. In truth, Wade Thorne was once codenamed Phantom, the most lethal Delta Force operator in American history. He had led more Black Ops missions than any man in his generation, and each operation had chipped away at his soul. After 3 decades, the ghosts of war weighed heavily, so he found the serene valley to lay down roots, far from the chaos he had known. This particular Tuesday began like any other. The sun rose over the eastern ridge, casting golden rays across the dew-laden fields. Wade finished his morning chores at dawn, feeding the cows, clearing a fallen branch from the fence, and making sure the water pump was working. Roscoe trotted faithfully at his side, his aging muzzle gray but his nose still sharp. Luna, the younger of the 2 dogs, ranged farther ahead, barking at squirrels. As he made his way back to the farmhouse, Wade couldn't shake a strange feeling. A primal sense within him, honed by years in hostile territory, suggested he was being watched. The windows of the small wooden house were closed and the porch was empty except for an old rocking chair. Nothing seemed out of place, yet the fine hairs on the back of his neck stood alert. He paused at the top of the porch steps, scanning the distance. The farmland rolled away toward the tree line, with no sign of anything unusual. But a foreboding whispered through the crisp air. Brushing it off as paranoia, he opened the screen door and stepped inside. Maybe his old instincts were just acting up. But he stayed on edge, letting those alarms in his head stay half-cocked, ready. Inside, he made a quick breakfast of black coffee and scrambled eggs. Pulling out a notepad, he wrote down what supplies he needed for the week: grain for the cows, extra seeds, and a trip to the local hardware store for fence wire. No sooner had he finished breakfast than his phone buzzed. Uncommon, given that cell service was limited and he rarely got calls. He checked the caller ID. It was Adam Hawthorne, the county sheriff. Wade frowned. Adam was a friend, one of the few in this valley who didn't pester him about his past. They'd gone fishing a few times, shared a quiet beer on occasion. If Adam was calling him this early, something must be off. He answered, "Sheriff." "Wade, I need a favor," Adam said, his voice on edge. "There's been some trouble near the county line. I was hoping you could come down to the station." Wade paused. "What kind of trouble?" "It's the kind we don't usually see around here," Adam replied, hesitating. "Folks crossing the border from up north of us." But these guys, they're new in town and I don't like their look. We have reports they're messing around near old Miller's place. Might be scoping out farmland for something. Could be thieves or could be, worse. I could use a hand. Despite Adam's measured tone, Wade sensed the underlying urgency. He tapped his fingers lightly on the table, thinking, "You want me to come in now?" "If you can," Adam said. "I'm worried this might get ugly." Wade set the phone down, glanced out the window, and exhaled. Trouble in Ironwood Valley, of all places. He couldn't deny the nagging in his gut. That strange, watchful feeling he'd had earlier came roaring back. He poured the rest of his coffee into the sink, grabbed his truck keys, and whistled for Roscoe and Luna. By the time he climbed into his old pickup, the tension in his shoulders had crystallized into an acute readiness. Without knowing it, both Wade Thorne and the entire Ironwood Valley were on the cusp of a dangerous saga. Trouble was indeed brewing, and it would lead to a confrontation no one in these parts could have imagined. As Wade's truck disappeared down the rural driveway, a dark SUV emerged from the edge of the forest. Inside it, unseen eyes tracked his departure, silently confirming that the old farmer was on the move and that the operation they had planned would soon begin. The county sheriff's office was a modest, single-story building with peeling white paint and a small parking lot. When Wade pulled up, he spotted Adam Hawthorne's cruiser parked out front. Next to it stood an unfamiliar SUV with tinted windows. Wade felt the prickle of caution before he even got out of his truck. As he stepped inside, the musty smell of old wood and stale coffee greeted him. A young deputy sat behind the reception counter, flipping through a binder. She looked up, recognized Wade, and nodded. "Sheriff's waiting for you in his office," she said. In the corridor, a warm overhead light reflected off the scuffed linoleum floor. Wade moved silently, each footfall controlled. He tapped on the sheriff's door and heard a muted "come in." Inside, Adam Hawthorne sat behind a cluttered desk, his wiry hair more disheveled than usual. Next to him stood a tall, broad-shouldered man in a crisp suit, the kind you didn't typically see in Ironwood Valley. "Wade," Adam said, standing. "I appreciate you coming so quickly." His voice was calmer now, but the lines on his forehead remained. "Sheriff," Wade replied, stepping forward. His gaze flicked to the stranger. "Wade, this is Special Agent Marcus Delgado from the DA," Adam said. "He has some intel about the group hanging around the valley." Wade raised an eyebrow, but his face remained unreadable. He had expected petty thieves, maybe a small gang. DA involvement implied something much bigger and more dangerous. Agent Delgado stepped forward, extending his hand. Wade shook it, noting the man's firm grip. "Mr. Thorne," Delgado began, "I understand you're ex-military. The sheriff here says you know the area and might help us figure out what's going on." Wade kept his voice measured. "That depends on what we're dealing with." Delgado nodded, his expression grave. "We have reason to believe that members of the Reyes cartel from northern Mexico have set up a small operation here. They're known for drug trafficking, arms dealing, you name it. Typically, they operate closer to the southern border, but we've been tracking a splinter group that's been expanding north. We suspect they might be using remote farmlands for drug storage or manufacturing labs off the grid." Adam leaned forward. "They were spotted by Old Man Miller last week. Miller said they offered him money to let them use a portion of his land for private business. He refused. Soon after, Miller's barn mysteriously caught fire. He's all right, but spooked. He's convinced they mean him harm." Wade sighed, his jaw tightening. "If it's a cartel, they'll push until they get what they want, and if that fails, they'll use force." Delgado moved around the desk, resting against it. "The DA can't allocate a full task force here without more evidence. We have limited manpower. Sheriff Hawthorne and I are trying to confirm if the Reyes splinter group is indeed in the valley and what they're planning. We've had some suspicious activity, anonymous tips about a large shipment of chemicals. That lines up with possible meth production or fentanyl labs. We don't know for sure." Wade considered the intelligence. He had encountered cartels in past missions abroad, cutthroat, well-funded, and unafraid to take on local law enforcement. "All right," he said quietly. "What do you need from me?" Adam offered a hopeful look. "I was thinking you could keep an eye out around your farm, Wade. You're up that way, near the ridgeline. If they're scoping remote properties, they'll eventually take a look at yours." Delgado folded his arms. We also heard rumors they might have a more significant motive for picking farmland in Montana, something about building a corridor. But we don't have concrete proof. If you see anything, call me immediately." He passed Wade a business card. Wade slipped the card into his jacket pocket. "Fine. But if they come onto my property, well, I won't be playing nice." Adam frowned. "I understand you can handle yourself, but we have to be careful. We don't want to start a war without backup." Wade gave a dismissive shrug. "You won't have a war as long as they mind their own business." From the look in Delgado's eyes, Wade could tell the agent had sized him up, suspecting that he was more than just a typical veteran. But Delgado wisely said nothing. With a curt nod, Wade turned to leave. As he reached the door, Adam called after him. "Wade, take care. I'll be in touch soon. Keep your head on a swivel." Wade left the office, stepping back into the uncharacteristically bright morning sun. The tension coiled inside him like a snake. The Reyes Cartel. The name alone conjured images of savage executions, kidnapping, and total disregard for human life. If that was indeed who was creeping around Ironwood Valley, it spelled danger for everyone. Driving home, Wade replayed the conversation in his mind. Was it possible the cartel already had an eye on his place? That would be a grave mistake on their part. But a smaller part of him flickered with an uncomfortable realization: if they pushed him, if they left him no choice but to use the skills he had honed over 3 decades, his tranquil existence in Montana would vanish. He had come here to find peace, to leave behind the perpetual violence that had defined him. Now that peace seemed poised to crumble under the weight of a coming storm. As Wade's truck rumbled back toward Ironwood Valley, the radio crackled to life with a faint, distorted voice, an emergency broadcast from a panicked local farmer. Static filled the cab as fragments of words cut through. "Shots fired near Miller's." Wade's grip tightened on the wheel. Trouble was already at his doorstep. The old truck sped down the winding gravel road, dust swirling behind it like a comet's tail. Wade's heart thumped with a familiar urgency. Shots fired near Miller's place. A quiet farmland was no place for gunfire unless the cartel had moved on Miller for refusing their offer. Wade's mind raced. How many cartel members could be out there? He had no direct intel, only rumors and scraps from the sheriff and the DA agent. Normally, he'd gather more information before rushing into a situation. But an innocent family could be in danger. As he neared Miller's property, the smell of smoke lingered in the air. The source of the earlier barn fire was a blackened skeleton of timber that jutted up from the charred ground. He spotted Miller's old pickup parked haphazardly near the house. The front door was wide open, a chair knocked over on the porch. Wade cut the engine and stepped out. Roscoe let out a low growl from the passenger seat, but Wade gestured for him to stay. He moved quietly, scanning the yard. No sign of movement. "Miller," Wade called, voice steady. "You here?" A rustle came from behind the partially open front door. Wade instinctively shifted sideways, flattening himself against the outer wall to minimize his silhouette. With a slight push, he nudged the door open. "Wade, that you?" came a quivering voice. He recognized it as Old Man Miller's. "Yeah," Wade answered, easing inside. "You all right?" Miller emerged from behind an overturned coffee table. He was pale, sweat glistening on his brow, and he clutched a double-barreled shotgun in trembling hands. "They were here," he stammered. "They shot at me, told me to sell or else." Wade eased the barrel of the shotgun down so it wasn't pointed at him. "How many?" "3. Spanish speakers. Didn't catch what they were calling each other. They wore nice boots, though, not farm boots. Could tell they were outsiders." Miller swallowed hard. "They fired a warning shot, told me I had 24 hours to reconsider. Then they took off in a black SUV. Anybody hurt?" Wade asked, scanning the area for bullet holes or shell casings. Miller shook his head. "They shot out my windows to scare me. I hid behind the table and fired off a round. I think I might have clipped their vehicle. Not sure." Wade didn't see any blood, but there were several shattered windows, glass littering the wooden floor. "You better let Adam know," Wade said, referring to the sheriff. "I'm guessing the law's already on the way." Miller nodded shakily, glancing at the phone on the wall. "Phones are down again. I'd need to drive into town." Wade gave him a grim nod. "Wait for the deputies to arrive. They'll want your statement." Miller exhaled, wiping sweat from his face. "I can't sell, Wade. This farm's been in my family for 90 years. "No one's asking you to," Wade replied. "But these men aren't bluffing. They'll be back." Outside, the distant sound of a siren echoed through the valley. Wade stepped onto the porch just as a single squad car pulled into the yard. Deputy Jackson, a lanky fellow with kind eyes, climbed out and approached. "You two okay?" Jackson asked, scanning the broken windows and the general disarray. "We're fine," Wade said. 3 men threatened Miller. Fired warning shots. Jackson blew out a breath. "I'll radio the sheriff. He'll want to get the place canvassed." Wade nodded and left Miller in the deputy's capable hands. There was nothing more he could do here but repeat what he'd heard. He hopped back into his truck, Roscoe watching him with anxious canine eyes. Wade ruffled the dog's ears, a silent reassurance. As he drove off, the fury in him simmered. The cartel had made their first overt move. In Wade's experience, such moves were never one-offs. They had tested Miller and found him uncooperative. The next step would be intimidation on a larger scale, maybe vandalism, kidnapping, or worse. If the Reyes cartel truly had a foothold in Ironwood Valley, they'd methodically target every farm until they found the cooperative arrangement they wanted. And that might include Wade's place. He decided then and there not to wait for them to come knocking. He would prepare. In the army, he had been the Phantom, an expert in asymmetric warfare. His Delta Force training taught him to anticipate the enemy's tactics, to use the environment against them. For years, he had set aside those deadly skills, content to mend fences and live a life free from violence. But if the fight was coming, he would meet it head-on, with or without law enforcement. By the time he reached his own property, the early afternoon sun was beating down. He let Roscoe out, patted Luna, who came bounding up wagging her tail, and headed straight to the locked shed behind his barn. Within that unassuming structure lay his carefully concealed arsenal, a relic of his past that he prayed he'd never need again. He keyed open the lock, stepped inside, and pulled a small chain that turned on a single overhead bulb. The light revealed a space meticulously arranged with crates and sealed metal cases. Wade knelt and opened one of the crates, his old call sign emblazoned on the top, Phantom. Inside lay tactical gear, a bulletproof vest, night vision goggles, and specialized communication devices. In a locked steel cabinet, there were firearms, an M4 carbine and State Route 25 sniper rifle, handguns, and enough ammunition to hold off a small army. All unregistered, all sourced from leftover missions that Uncle Sam would never publicly acknowledge existed. He took a deep breath. His reflection in the steel cabinet looked older, lines around his eyes. But the eyes themselves bore the same unflinching resolve from his days in Black Ops. He ran a hand over the M4, memories flooding back of nights in foreign deserts and jungles where the darkness was his ally. If they want a war, he thought, I'll show them a side of me they never knew existed. As Wade locked the shed, a cold gust of wind rattled the barn doors. A distant echo of an engine cut through the silent fields, hinting that strangers were already closing in. Unbeknownst to him, a pair of cartel scouts lay watching from the tree line, binoculars trained on the farm. They had no idea what kind of man they were really observing, and soon they would find out. Late afternoon light slanted across the Ironwood Valley, painting the fields in amber hues. While the rest of the region might have been unaware of the brewing conflict, Wade Thorne wasted no time fortifying his homestead. He walked the perimeter of his property, placing small, inconspicuous markers, stones, sticks, and bits of cloth that only he would recognize. Each marker denoted the strategic placement for tripwires, motion detectors, and vantage points suitable for overwatch. With care, he installed a network of crude but effective early warning systems. Fishing lines attached to tin cans, hidden among tall grass and fence posts, would rattle if someone approached stealthily. On higher ground, a small hollow in the earth made for a perfect hide site. Wade had discovered it months ago while hunting for coyotes that had been pestering his livestock. He lined the spot with burlap to reduce glare off the scope lens and stashed an State Route 25 sniper rifle there. From that vantage point, he could see much of the farmland below, the approach roads, and the edges of the forest. Next, he placed a few strategic deterrents. Over the years, Wade had befriended local ranchers, many of whom swore by the old ways, like digging post holes and burying barbed wire spikes angled upward. This technique, while archaic, could immobilize an intruding vehicle if it went off the main dirt road. He camouflaged these with natural debris, ensuring they wouldn't snag friendly neighbors by placing them only in locations that outsiders were likely to traverse if trying to circle the property. Finally, he returned to the farmhouse, a wooden, single-story structure with a cozy fireplace. Inside, he secured the windows with reinforced shutters. He used reclaimed steel bars he'd once stored in the barn to fasten over the inside frames. Not so heavy that he couldn't remove them quickly if needed, but secure enough to block forced entry. By the time he was done, twilight had bled across the sky. A calm hush settled over the fields, the only sounds the whisper of wind in the grass and the distant bark of a coyote. Wade stood on his porch, breathing in the evening air. Every step he'd taken felt like he was locking himself back into a mindset he had spent years trying to leave behind. Yet each action also brought a sense of readiness, a paradoxical calm that came with preparation. Inside, he fed the dogs, cracked open a can of stew for himself, and turned on a single lamp. As he ate, he listened for any unusual sounds beyond the walls. Memory tugged at him, recalling nights in makeshift camps overseas, waiting for insurgents to test the perimeter. The sense of déjà vu was almost suffocating, yet the stakes here were different. This was his home turf, and the invaders were criminals, not foreign combatants. He finished dinner, cleaned up, and donned a lightweight tactical vest fitted with ballistic plates. It felt strange to wear this kind of gear in his living room, but a look at the bullet-riddled windows at Miller's place was enough to convince him. If the cartel planned to pay him a visit, they might not knock politely. He slung a carbine over his shoulder and waited. As the hours stretched on, the lamp's yellow glow carved out a little bubble of light in the dark farmhouse. Midnight approached, and still no sign of the enemy. Sometimes, the waiting was worse than the fight itself. A few minutes past midnight, Luna pricked her ears and let out a quiet whine. Roscoe lifted his head from where he'd been dozing. Wade sprang up, crossing to the window. He peered through a narrow gap in the shutters. Out by the far edge of the fence, a pair of faint headlights bobbed along the dirt road. He couldn't make out the vehicle type yet, but the direction was suspicious. It led away from the main highway and deeper into farmland. He moved to a side window for a better angle. The headlights paused at a bend in the road. Then they blinked out, leaving the farmland in darkness once more. Wade flicked off his lamp, plunging the interior of the house into blackness. He slipped on a pair of night vision goggles. The greenish glow revealed the perimeter of his yard, the fence line, and the partial silhouette of the approaching vehicle. A black SUV moving slowly. Another set of headlights emerged behind it, then cut off as well. 2 vehicles at least. Wade's heartbeat thrummed. He spoke a quiet command to Roscoe and Luna, instructing them to stay. Then, as silently as a shadow, he slipped out the back door and into the night. Outside, the crisp air stung his lungs. He crouched low, moving around the side of the barn. His night vision goggles gave him a clear view of 2 SUVs creeping up the road. A trio of armed men exited the first vehicle. They moved in disciplined formation, scanning with flashlights. Not amateurs, Wade realized. These men had some training. He counted 4 more exiting the second SUV. A total of 7. Possibly an 8th driver still behind the wheel. From their hushed conversation in Spanish, Wade could pick up bits and pieces. Farmhouse is over there. Boss wants the old man convinced. If he doesn't sell, we do what we did to Miller. Wade's jaw clenched. They were indeed after him. He recognized something else in their posture. They believed they were superior in firepower and numbers. They had no idea who they were dealing with. He watched as they split into 2 groups. One circled toward the back of the farmhouse, the other advanced along the main driveway. They carried assault rifles, which glinted in the moonlight. A single misstep and bullets would tear through the walls of his home. Wade allowed them to advance a little farther, herding them onto the path where he'd set some of his surprises. Sure enough, the first pair walked right into a hidden tripwire. A faint clatter of cans and metal gave them a start, and one man swore under his breath. They froze, scanning the area with their lights. The rest of the group held position, confused. That was Wade's opportunity. From the barn corner, he raised his carbine, toggled a silent setting on his laser sight, and aimed. A single suppressed round cracked the silence, striking the ground inches from the lead man's foot, close enough to make them jump but intentionally missing. He wanted them to know they were being watched, but not from where. The group scattered in alarm, a few diving for cover behind the SUVs. Flashlights whipped around wildly. One man barked orders in Spanish. Wade shifted his position quietly, crouching in the shadows. This was asymmetric warfare in motion, instilling uncertainty, making a larger force question every step. The muzzle flash from a return shot cut through the night, but it was aimed blindly. A second suppressed shot. This one shattered the side mirror of the first SUV, sending shards of glass flying. The men returned fire again, muzzle flashes lighting the dark. Bullets whizzed through the air, striking the ground, the barn walls. Inside his goggles, Wade calmly observed their muzzle positions. They had no idea where he was. Now they were pinned down in open territory while Wade controlled the environment. He considered finishing them off outright, but something deep in him hesitated. These men were criminals, but they were also likely foot soldiers following orders. Taking them out might escalate the cartel's response. He needed at least one alive to deliver a message. This land was off limits. He keyed a small handheld transmitter, remotely activating the motion sensors around his farm. A series of beeps emitted from concealed spots around the yard, disorienting the attackers further. They spun in circles, not knowing which beep was real or a diversion. Then Wade spoke, voice amplified through a covert speaker system he'd set up earlier that evening. "Leave now and you walk away alive," he said, his voice low and distorted. "This farm isn't for sale." One of the cartel soldiers shouted back, "You think we're scared, old man? We'll burn your house to the ground." 3 shots rang out from the barn's loft. Wade had a secondary vantage point there, controlled by a remote trigger. Bullets pelted the dirt in front of the men, close enough to throw dust in their faces. They cowered, the bravado draining from their stance. Finally, one of the men yelled in Spanish, "Pull back. Fall back." The group retreated, firing blindly in Wade's general direction. Rounds ricocheted off the barn's metal roof. Wade stayed low, waiting. The men scrambled back into their SUVs, engines revved, tires squealed in the dirt. As they sped away into the night, dust clouded the road. Wade eased his finger off the trigger, listening to the vehicles fade into the distance. Slowly, he emerged from the barn's cover, scanning for any stragglers. Nothing. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. As the dust settled, Wade heard a faint, strangled cough nearby. He froze, scanning the darkness, and spotted a figure lying on the ground near the fence line. One of the cartel men had been left behind, injured, wheezing, clutching his leg where a bullet had grazed or possibly shattered bone. Wade approached cautiously, gun raised, adrenaline still surging. The wounded man locked eyes with him, fear and fury intermingling. Wade realized this was his chance to get answers, but it could also be a deadly trap. Moonlight bathed the injured cartel soldier in a silver glow as he writhed in the grass, one hand pressed against his bleeding leg. The bullet had torn through muscle, rendering him unable to stand. Wade kept his carbine trained on the man, the night vision goggles revealing every tremor of his pain. Wade gave a quick whistle, calling Luna to his side. The dog approached with hackles raised, growling low. Roscoe stayed near the porch, watching. "You speak English?" Wade asked calmly, stepping closer. The man hissed in pain but offered no reply. With a swift motion, Wade kicked away the rifle lying near the soldier's reach. He patted the man down, removing a sidearm from his waistband and a knife strapped to his ankle. Then he stood back, gun still raised. "Who sent you?" The wounded man glared, lips curling. "You don't scare me," he spat in Spanish-tinged English. Wade let the statement hang in the air. "You're on my land, shooting up my home. You had the option to leave. I gave you that. Your men left you behind. So tell me, do I scare you now?" Silence. The man grunted, struggling to stanch the bleeding. Wade sighed, slipping out of the night vision goggles so he could look the man in the eye. "You should know something. I've been in your situation more times than I care to count. This can go 2 ways. You keep talking tough, bleed out, and your bosses don't even come looking for your body. Or you give me information and maybe you get to keep that leg." He could see the man processing his options. The soldier's eyes darted around, searching for a possible escape. Finding none, he slumped back. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "My boss, he'll kill you." Wade's expression remained stone cold. "That's a risk I'll take. Now talk." The soldier winced, hand shaking from either fear or blood loss. "It's the Reyes cartel," he began. "We've been sent here to secure farmland for a new operation. Not just your land. Others, too. We don't need to buy it all. Just enough to set up labs, distribution points. You farmers are stubborn. Boss says to make you fear us. Wade's lips tightened. Who's your boss? Eduardo Reyes, nephew of the main family. He runs this expansion. He wants a foothold in the north, far from the southern border. Smuggling routes. Labs for meth, fentanyl. He doesn't care about your laws. Wade nodded slowly, taking in the details. And this boss of yours, does he have local law enforcement in his pocket? The soldier barked a humorless laugh. He doesn't bribe small-town cops. He scares them or kills them. Your sheriff doesn't matter. A tense pause followed. Wade glanced over the man's injuries. He could see the bullet's exit wound, an ugly tear in the soldier's pants. Bleeding was steady, not gushing. He'd live for a while. How many men does Eduardo have out here? Wade asked, pressing. Enough, the soldier answered through gritted teeth. More than you can handle alone. He'll send more men, more guns. He'll burn this place and your neighbors. Wade let that threat settle in the charged air. A surge of old instincts coursed through him, memories of dealing with insurgent cells, extracting intel, neutralizing threats. The soldiers' arrogance told Wade everything he needed about their plan. They believed they could overrun a quiet valley with ease. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. He shifted, glancing back at the farmhouse. Inside, he had a first aid kit and the training to stabilize a gunshot wound. But helping this man might only invite more trouble unless it served a purpose. Wade came to a decision. He knelt, slipping a hand into his vest pocket, retrieving a zip tie. Expertly, he bound the soldier's hands behind his back. The man cursed, struggling. You said your boss is Eduardo Reyes, Wade stated. You have a phone on you? The soldier's glare was answer enough. Wade frisked him again, found a phone in his pocket. He pressed the screen. It was locked. How do I open it? The soldier spat at Wade's feet. Kill me, gringo. I'm not giving you anything else. Wade's eyes narrowed. Without warning, he pressed a thumb on the phone's fingerprint sensor, holding it against the soldier's hand. With a beep, the phone unlocked. The soldier's defiance turned to dismay. Wade flicked through contacts, scanning for anything labeled with names or coded references. He found an entry, Chief, Spanish for boss. He stared at it, tempted to call or text. But that was a risk. Eduardo might trace it or suspect something. Instead, he pocketed the phone. Fine, Wade said. No more questions. And I'm not going to kill you. He paused, letting the soldier's confusion set in. I'm going to leave you here, zip-tied, for the sheriff to find. Best of luck explaining yourself. A flash of realization and fear crossed the soldier's face. He swore again, but this time the bravado was gone. Hold on, he yelled as Wade turned to go. I can't walk. You leave me here, I'll bleed. You said you're not scared, Wade shot back. Good luck. He gave a short whistle, calling Luna to follow him. Back in the house, Wade watched from the window as the wounded man shouted curses into the darkness. Wade picked up the phone, considered calling the sheriff directly. But a check of the clock told him it would take at least 40 minutes for Adam Hawthorne or his deputies to get here. The man would still be there, presumably. After a moment's thought, Wade dialed Adam. The line crackled before connecting. A weary voice answered, Adam here. Wade glanced at the still cursing soldier out by the fence. Sheriff, I have a gift for you. He explained the situation in curt detail. Adam was silent for several seconds, then let out a resigned sigh. I'll head out with a deputy. We'll take him in for questioning. Wade hung up, looking down at the phone from the soldier's pocket. If the Reyes cartel was truly behind this, the confrontation was just beginning. They'd soon realize one of their men was missing. The next time they came, it wouldn't be a 7-man probing attack. They'd come in force. He gazed out at the silhouette of the mountains, faint against the star-strewn sky. Ironwood Valley was about to become a battlefield. And Wade Thorne, the Phantom, was the only one standing between the cartel and the peaceful homes they sought to terrorize. Headlights appeared on the horizon, the sheriff's cruiser finally arriving to collect the wounded cartel soldier. Unbeknownst to Wade, a single figure with binoculars watched from a distant ridge. With a cold, ruthless expression, that observer slipped away into the trees, determined to report back to the Reyes cartel that the old farmer was no ordinary man and that their next move had to be devastating. Night yielded to a pale dawn, the early sky streaked with orange and pink. Inside his farmhouse, Wade brewed a strong pot of coffee. He had slept only a couple of hours, staying alert until the sheriff arrived and took custody of the wounded cartel soldier. After finishing his official statement, Wade shut his doors, locked up, and tried to rest. But sleep brought fragments of nightmares, flashbacks to war zones, ambushes, whispered radio calls for extraction. Now, the new day brought fresh resolve. He needed information, and he needed it fast. The phone he had taken from the soldier might hold vital intel, so he plugged it into his laptop using specialized software acquired during his service to bypass any passcodes or encryption. A progress bar crept along the screen, scanning the phone's contents. While the software worked, Wade stepped outside, letting the crisp morning air sharpen his senses. Roscoe followed, tail wagging feebly. The dog was too old to run around much, but he remained Wade's loyal companion. Together, they walked the perimeter. Wade checked his tripwires, sensors, and the shallow spikes he'd planted, making small adjustments for better concealment. Once satisfied, he returned to the farmhouse. The laptop beeped, the analysis complete. He opened a folder titled Messages and found a series of text conversations in Spanish, some referencing drop-off times, others referencing coded shipments. One thread with the contact name Jeef detailed plans to visit the old man's farm again. A line dated just before last night's attack read, "Handle him. Make it clear we don't ask twice." Wade's gaze flicked to a set of GPS coordinates in another message, possibly the location of a safe house or staging area. He recognized the coordinates as somewhere in the forested foothills west of Ironwood Valley. If that was their hideout, it would explain how they were staging these night raids so quickly. He picked up his own phone and dialed the DEA agent, Delgado. After 2 rings, a groggy voice answered, "Delgado here." "It's Wade Thorne," Wade said bluntly. "I have intel off a cartel soldier's phone. Coordinates that might be their hideout." A rustle of movement on the other end. Delgado was suddenly awake. "You serious? How do you never mind? Where are they?" Wade read off the coordinates, listening to Delgado scribble them down. "If you're going to act, make it quick," Wade added. "They know one of their men is in custody. They'll likely move soon." Delgado exhaled. "Understood. I can get a small team together, state police, maybe a couple of DA field agents. But it'll take time." Time, Wade thought, was a luxury. "Your call," he said. "But do it fast, or we'll have a lot more dead men on our hands." They ended the call with a promise to stay in contact. Setting down the phone, Wade looked around his modest farmhouse. He realized that waiting for law enforcement to mobilize might be futile. The Reyes cartel could pull up stakes anytime. If he wanted to protect the valley, he might have to act on his own. No, not entirely on his own. Wade still had contacts, former Delta operators, some of them living off the grid just like he was. The problem was reaching them in time and whether they'd agree to get involved. But if the cartel escalated, Wade would need allies who understood how to operate in a clandestine, high-stakes environment. He powered up a satellite phone, a relic from his past. It was a secure line, rarely used. Thumbing through his list of cryptic entries, he paused at the name Rhino. That was the call sign for Marcus Rhodes, an ex-Delta buddy. If anyone was crazy enough and owed Wade enough favors to come running, it was Rhino. "Come on, pick up," Wade muttered as he tapped the number. There was a painful silence followed by a crackle. Then a deep, gruff voice answered, "This is Rhino." "It's Phantom," Wade replied, using the handle he hadn't spoken aloud in years. "Need your help? Situation stateside in Montana." A pause. "You got some nerve calling me after all these years, brother. What's going on?" Wade laid out the basics, a cartel infiltration, intimidation of local farmers, and a plan to set up drug operations. He kept it concise. Rhino listened intently. "You outnumbered?" Rhino asked. "Could be," Wade admitted. "They've got numbers, resources, and they're not afraid to use them. I'm not looking to start a war, but if it comes to it, I'd rather be prepared." Rhino let out a humorless chuckle. "You're always in some shit, Phantom. All right. I can pull in a couple of guys, might take a day or 2. But we're not in the business of vigilante justice." "You got local law enforcement there?" "Yeah," Wade said, "they're outgunned. And the DA is shorthanded." "Figures. Look, text me the location. We'll figure something out." Wade ended the call feeling a sliver of relief. If Rhino could come through, Wade would have a small team of highly trained operators, exactly what was needed for a surgical strike against the cartel's hideout. But time was of the essence. A sudden buzz on Wade's laptop interrupted his planning. A new message had come through on the cartel soldier's phone. It was from Jeef, and it simply read, "Prepare for retaliation. We'll make an example of that farm tonight." Wade felt his pulse spike. The cartel wasn't wasting any time, they were coming back, and they were coming back hard. Dusk settled over Ironwood Valley in shades of purple and gold. Wade paced on his front porch, scanning the horizon. If the cartel planned to strike tonight, they'd have the advantage of numbers and brutality. Wade's advantage was the home turf and a lifetime of training in guerrilla warfare. He had spent the afternoon making additional preparations. He reinforced a few more vantage points, set up a small command post in his living room with a radio scanner and the soldier's phone. Each passing minute raised the tension a notch. Would Rhino and his friends arrive in time? He got his answer just before sunset when he heard the roar of a pickup truck cresting the gravel road. Dust billowed behind it as it pulled up near the barn. 3 figures hopped out, each moving with the effortless confidence of trained operators. The first was Rhino himself, Marcus Rhodes, broad-shouldered, his beard peppered with gray. He wore a battered cap and carried a duffel bag that Wade guessed was stuffed with weapons. Behind him were 2 more men, Doc, a former Special Forces medic, and Hawk, a lean sniper with hawk-like eyes that missed nothing. Wade descended the porch steps, meeting them halfway. Each greeted him with a gruff handshake and a nod. Despite the years and the tension, camaraderie flowed back easily. "Nice place you got, Phantom," Rhino remarked, scanning the farm. "Shame about the company you're expecting." Wade smirked. "I appreciate you coming." Doc gave a half shrug. "Couldn't leave you hanging, especially with a cartel in your backyard." Hawk stared out at the tree line, gaze intense. "This valley's wide open. You got any high ground to exploit?" Wade nodded, gesturing toward a ridge overlooking the farm. "I scouted a perfect spot for Overwatch. Got a hide prepped with a sniper rifle. No question they'll approach from the main road or the tree line." Rhino clapped a hand on Wade's shoulder. "All right, let's get a briefing." Inside the farmhouse, Wade spread a map of Ironwood Valley across his kitchen table. He pointed to his property, then to the coordinates from the soldier's phone. The men listened intently. "They attacked last night, tested the waters," Wade explained. "I set up some deterrents, forced them to retreat. They left 1 guy behind who squealed about their boss, Eduardo Reyes. They'll come heavier tonight." Rhino stroked his beard. "Any chance we can hit them first? Surprise them at their hideout?" Wade shook his head. "DA wants to mount something, but they'll be slow. Cartel's likely moving or reinforcing. The text I intercepted said they'd retaliate tonight, probably to save face after last night's fiasco. We need to be ready here." Doc chimed in. "We can't hold off an army, but we can inflict enough damage to make them think twice." Hawk tapped the map. "I'll take the ridge with the sniper rifle. Rhino, Doc, and Phantom can man the perimeter. Any civilians in the immediate area?" Wade shook his head. "Nearest neighbors are miles away." A silent understanding passed among them. This was Old Hat, setting a kill zone, overlapping fields of fire, establishing fallback points. They assigned positions, Hawk on the ridge, Rhino and Doc near the barn, Wade on the porch with vantage of the driveway and main yard. They inspected Wade's arsenal in the locked shed. Rhino grinned at the collection. "Someone's been busy," he noted, admiring the meticulously maintained firearms. Wade handed out gear, night vision goggles, suppressed rifles, extra magazines. Each man checked their equipment, a series of well-practiced motions that felt like a grim reunion. As they geared up, Wade's phone buzzed with a text. It was from Sheriff Hawthorne. Large convoy spotted on the highway, multiple SUVs, unknown plates, heading toward the valley. Stay alert. A cold dread settled over them. The cartel wasn't just sending a small group this time, they were bringing a convoy. The clock was ticking and the battle for Ironwood Valley was about to begin. Night draped the valley in darkness, moonlight casting ghostly shadows over the farmland. A gentle wind whispered through the tall grass as if sensing the violence to come. Wade took his position on the front porch, leaning against a wooden column. Roscoe and Luna were inside, locked away for their safety. Rhino and Doc stationed themselves behind the barn, near a set of hay bales that offered cover. Hawk was already atop the ridge, prone behind a concealed vantage point. Their radios crackled occasionally with terse updates. Time stretched, punctuated by their heightened alertness. Around 10 p.m., Hawk's voice came through the earpiece. Convoy spotted. 4, maybe 5 vehicles. They're dousing their headlights. Wade raised his binoculars. Sure enough, in the distance, faint silhouettes moved along the dirt road, engines rumbling low. They crept closer, barely visible in the moonlight. Fear might have kept them from storming in with roaring engines. They knew the old man was no pushover. This time, they were playing it smart. Or so they thought. They're stopping, Hawk reported. Dropping men off. I count at least a dozen foot mobiles, plus the drivers. A dozen men. Possibly more. Wade felt that old adrenaline surge. Even with 4 highly trained operators, they were outnumbered nearly 3 to 1. Let them funnel in, Wade whispered into the radio. We'll spring the trap once they're close. A chorus of static clicks confirmed the plan. In the distance, flashlights bobbed as the cartel foot soldiers advanced carefully. The silhouette of rifles and shotguns marked them as heavily armed. Wade counted down in his head. 10 men visible, 2 or 3 more lurking behind the vehicles. They fanned out in a search pattern, covering each other as they moved. It was clear they had learned from last night's fiasco. They approached from multiple angles, front gate, side field, and near the barn. Each angle, however, was a kill zone if they stepped in too far. At the barn, Rhino and Doc hugged the ground behind the bales. The plan was to let the cartel come close, then ambush. On the porch, Wade waited, breath steady. Hawk, perched on high ground, would deliver precise sniper fire once the shooting started. Minutes felt like hours as the enemy crept closer. Wade eyed the faint outline of the second group heading around the barn. A moment later, a single gunshot cracked the air, Hawk's sniper rifle speaking. One of the cartel men dropped instantly, the rest diving for cover in a panicked scramble. Contact, Rhino's voice hissed. Engaging. Automatic gunfire erupted from behind the barn. Tracer rounds lit the darkness and muzzle flashes strobed the yard. Cartel soldiers shouted in Spanish, returning fire. The night exploded into chaos, bullets tearing into wooden fences, ricocheting off metal surfaces. Wade spotted 3 men advancing on his porch. He squeezed the trigger of his suppressed carbine. 2 went down, the third took cover behind an old tractor. Wade fired a few more rounds to keep him pinned. A second sniper shot echoed from the ridge, another attacker dropping in a silent burst. The rest realized they were caught in a crossfire. They scurried for any cover they could find, trees, old equipment, the farm's fencing. Rhino's boisterous laugh sounded over the comm. They're pinned. Keep pressure. Doc's measured voice followed. I'll flank left, Rhino. Cover me. From Wade's porch vantage, he saw Doc slip around the barn, firing short bursts that cut down 2 more cartel soldiers who had huddled behind a feed trough. Shouts of panic in Spanish echoed through the yard. The attackers realized they were up against professional killers, not just a lone farmer. Wade's earpiece buzzed with Hawk's urgent tone. We got movement at the vehicles, back up. Another wave. Sure enough, more men poured from the SUVs, at least 6 or 7 new fighters adding to the chaos. They spread out, firing wildly into the night, hoping to suppress the sniper. Hawk calmly replied with well-placed shots, but the sheer volume of return fire forced him to shift positions. Wade ducked as bullets thudded into the porch's wooden railing. Splinters flew past his face. He returned fire, dropping 1 assailant. Another tried to toss a Molotov cocktail toward the farmhouse, but a single shot from Wade's carbine ignited the bottle mid-throw, engulfing the attacker in flame. The man's screams tore through the night. Near the barn, Rhino and Doc fought like men possessed. Their movements were orchestrated, covering each other's blind spots. Whenever a cartel member popped up, a burst of gunfire cut him down. Yet the cartel kept coming, their own fear overridden by what must have been orders from someone truly terrifying. In the midst of the fight, the radio crackled with a new voice, gravelly, arrogant, speaking Spanish. Maiden al fantasma, Hagen pedazos ese bastardo. Wade recognized enough Spanish to catch the meaning, kill the phantom. Tear that bastard to pieces. So they knew. The Reyes cartel was calling him out by his old moniker. Bullets whizzed past. Wade popped out from behind the post, firing at a cluster of enemies near the barn. One dropped, the others scattered. Rhino, seeing his chance, lobbed a flashbang into their midst. The deafening blast and brilliant flash disoriented them. A heartbeat later, Rhino and Doc stepped out, rifles blazing. The cartel men collapsed. All around, the once peaceful farm was marred by the churned earth, bullet-riddled fences, and the pungent smell of cordite. The strobing muzzle flashes revealed bodies strewn across the yard, some writhing, others motionless. Suddenly, the roar of an engine tore through the chaos. One of the SUVs sped forward, headlights on full beam, barreling straight toward the barn. Inside, Wade glimpsed a driver hunched over the wheel, a crazed look in his eyes. If it reached the barn, the explosion or impact could level half the structure and potentially incinerate Rhino and Doc. Wade lifted his weapon, heart pounding. Could he stop the speeding vehicle in time? The SUV barreled across the yard, bullet-riddled and smoking, but still roaring ahead like a battering ram. Wade knew that if the driver aimed for the barn, Rhino and Doc were in grave danger. In the frantic chaos, they might not notice the speeding vehicle until it was too late. Acting on instinct, Wade sprinted across the porch, stepping into the open for a clean shot at the windshield. Bullets zipped by him, one grazing his shoulder in a hot, searing line of pain. He barely felt it, adrenaline surging. Raising his carbine, he aimed at the SUV's engine block, a method he'd perfected during countless missions. He fired in controlled bursts. Sparks erupted as rounds punched through the metal grille. Smoke poured from the engine. The SUV's path wobbled, but the driver kept going, bent on ramming the barn. Wade adjusted aim, this time at the windshield. A 3-round burst shattered the glass, striking the driver. The vehicle jerked violently, spinning off course. Instead of hitting the barn head-on, it veered and crashed into a water trough and some stacked hay bales. The impact reverberated across the field, flames licking at the hood. Rhino and Doc, alerted by the commotion, turned just in time to see the SUV slam to a stop mere yards away. They scrambled back, avoiding the debris. Wade slumped behind a large tractor tire, breathing hard, his wounded shoulder throbbing. Through gritted teeth, he keyed his radio. "You guys all right?" Rhino's winded reply came. "Yeah, thanks to you. That was close." Another barrage of gunfire erupted from the far side of the yard. Hawk, on the ridge, radioed in. "They're trying to retreat, but they're laying down heavy cover fire. I'm shifting position to neutralize them." From the farmhouse, Wade spotted 4 cartel gunmen grouping near the remaining SUVs, firing in all directions to keep the defenders at bay. Bullets ricocheted off the barn walls, windows, and the tractor. Wade steadied himself, forcing the pain in his shoulder to the background. He advanced cautiously. Each step was a calculated risk. He returned fire, forcing the group to duck behind the SUV doors. From the ridge, Hawk's sniper rifle cracked again, and 1 man dropped. The remaining 3 panicked. One jumped into the driver's seat of an SUV, revving the engine, while another clambered into the passenger side. The third realized he had no cover and sprinted away, only to be cut down by Rhino's precise burst. With tires squealing, the SUV sped off into the night, its headlights glaring, leaving behind a battlefield littered with bodies and shell casings. A single tail light flickered on a second SUV that managed to limp away, engine sputtering. They were in full retreat now. Doc's voice crackled on the radio. "We got runners. Should we pursue?" Wade paused to survey the damage. Pursuit could be a trap, especially if the cartel had reinforcements waiting. "Negative," he said, breathing heavily. "Let them run. We've got wounded here, might have intel." He limped toward the nearest cartel soldier, who lay moaning in the grass. The man clutched a shattered arm, eyes wide with terror and pain. Rhino and Doc came over, weapons raised. Hawk radioed that he was coming down from the ridge. The carnage was extensive. Wade's farm looked like a war zone, smoke, scattered debris, bullet holes in everything that stood more than a few feet high. He felt a pang of sorrow for the ruin of his once peaceful haven, but that sorrow was mixed with grim satisfaction. They had repelled the cartel's major assault. Before Wade could question the wounded gunman, the man's radio crackled. A commanding voice shouted in Spanish, "Fall back to the hideout. Regroup. We'll burn everything in that valley if we have to." Wade exchanged a look with Rhino. The fight might be over for now, but the cartel wasn't done. They still had the hideout in the foothills, and they weren't going to rest until Ironwood Valley was under their control or burned to the ground. The aftermath of the battle was a grim tableau. Bodies littered the yard, some of them still clinging to life. Rhino, Doc, and Wade moved swiftly to clear weapons from the fallen. Hawk arrived moments later, rifle slung over his shoulder, scanning the scene with a practiced eye. "We should call the sheriff," Wade murmured, pressing a gauze pad to the bloody groove in his shoulder. "This is way above our pay grade." Doc, the team's medic, gently pried Wade's hand away to inspect the wound. "Through and through," he announced. "You're lucky. No bone or artery." He reached into his kit, cleaning and dressing the injury with practiced skill. Despite the sting, Wade was grateful for Doc's expertise. Rhino rolled a dead cartel soldier onto his back, checking for ID or useful intel. These guys weren't messing around. "Body armor, grenades," he muttered. "We don't have the manpower to keep repelling attacks like this if they bring more." Wade, gritting his teeth through the bandaging, nodded. "We can't just sit here waiting for the next wave. If they regroup at that hideout, they could bring twice as many men." Hawk joined them, wiping sweat from his brow. "We should take the fight to them. Hit them before they recover." Silence fell as the four men weighed the risk. In his Delta Force days, Wade often led missions deep behind enemy lines. Hitting the cartel's hideout head-on would be dangerous, but letting them strike again at a time of their choosing was worse. Doc finished dressing Wade's wound, then stood. "If we do it soon. They won't expect a counterattack, especially with just 4 of us. But we'll have the element of surprise." Rhino scanned the battered landscape of Wade's farm. "You sure about this, Phantom? We could wait for DEA. Delgado might be able to get reinforcements. Or National Guard." Wade exhaled a weary sigh. He glanced at the wounded cartel man, who lay unconscious from blood loss. The last thing he wanted was more bodies on his property, more violence. But waiting for the authorities could take days, and the Reyes cartel wouldn't waste time. "We move tonight," Wade said. "We know their location from that phone. We have enough equipment to stage a covert raid." Rhino nodded, stepping away to call Delgado on a secure line. The rest of them began gathering ammunition, rifles, and any gear they would need for a rapid assault. Before long, Rhino returned, shaking his head. "Delgado's still trying to rustle up backup. Hours, maybe more. He said if we go in alone, it's at our own risk. But he'll meet us there if he can." Wade grimaced. "Sounds about right." Together, they worked quickly, loading up Rhino's pickup with gear and extra munitions. Wade took a last look at his battered farm. Memories of peaceful mornings with Roscoe and Luna, quiet sunsets, the satisfaction of building a life away from violence, they all weighed heavily on him. But the day he turned a blind eye to a threat like the Reyes cartel was the day he stopped being Wade Thorne. If he didn't fight, the valley and its people would suffer the consequences. As they climbed into the truck, Rhino in the driver's seat, Wade's heart pounded with renewed purpose. It wasn't just about his land anymore, it was about the entire Ironwood Valley, about every family and friend living here in rural isolation. These criminals had arrived uninvited, thinking they could terrorize small-town folk. They had no idea what kind of man they had provoked. Rhino's truck roared down the gravel road, headlights off to maintain stealth. In the rearview mirror, the glow of Wade's burning hay and the wrecked SUV faded into the distance. Ahead lay the forested foothills and a hidden compound teeming with cartel soldiers. The team had no illusions. This mission would be a do-or-die gambit against a ruthless foe. Ironwood Valley's winding roads led the small team away from the farmland and into rugged, forested terrain. Tall pines swayed in the breeze as if whispering warnings about what lay ahead. With the truck's headlights off, the only illumination came from the moon, which occasionally broke through the canopy. Hawk manned a handheld GPS, guiding Rhino along dirt roads and narrow trails toward the coordinates extracted from the cartel soldier's phone. Doc sat in the back, checking and rechecking his medical kit and weapon. Wade rode shotgun, scanning the darkness with a suppressed sense of anticipation. His shoulder ached, but adrenaline dulled the pain. They reached a rutted logging track that cut deeper into the woods. Rhino eased the truck forward, mindful of branches and rocks. Half a mile in, he killed the engine. "We go on foot from here," he muttered. They disembarked, each man hoisting a pack of gear. Wade breathed in the scent of pine needles and damp earth, the hush of the forest enveloping them. This was familiar ground to him. No matter how many operations he'd run in deserts and jungles, navigating hostile territory at night was second nature. Quietly, they advanced, using night vision goggles to pick out the terrain. No one spoke unless necessary, each footstep carefully placed. Occasional owls hooted in the distance, but otherwise the silence was oppressive. After nearly 40 minutes of hiking, Hawk raised a clenched fist, signaling a halt. They crouched in the undergrowth as he peered through a small gap. "I see lights ahead," he whispered. "Looks like a compound. A couple of buildings, maybe an old hunting lodge." Wade inched forward, pulling out binoculars fitted with low-light lenses. The vantage point revealed a sprawling clearing with an aging wooden structure, half of it built from stone. A large outbuilding, possibly a workshop or barn, stood nearby. Security lights illuminated a section of the yard, and Wade counted 3 SUVs parked haphazardly. Cartel soldiers milled about, some patrolling with rifles, others smoking near a makeshift fire. He spotted a row of stacked barrels and boxes, possibly containing chemicals or weapons. This wasn't just a hideout, it was an active operation. He also noticed that they looked tense, on alert. Word of the failed assault on Wade's farm must have reached them. Rhino passed around a small thermal scope, each man taking a turn to assess the area. Doc pointed to a section of perimeter fence. "Looks like a gap on the west side. Could be a weak spot." Wade nodded. "We should split into 2 groups. Rhino and Hawk provide overwatch from the tree line. Doc and I will circle around to breach that gap. We create a distraction, funnel them out. Then Rhino and Hawk pick them off." They reviewed contingencies quickly. Each carried extra mags, flashbangs, and a few grenades. They agreed on radio signals for fallback or extraction. Delgado was nowhere in sight, no backup coming yet. As they finalized the plan, a distant rumble of engines broke the stillness. Headlights appeared on the far side of the compound. Another convoy was arriving. Wade cursed under his breath. They hadn't anticipated reinforcements so soon. Their window for a stealthy assault was closing fast. The sound of the arriving convoy galvanized Wade and his team into immediate action. While Rhino and Hawk set up a makeshift overwatch position behind dense fir trees, Wade and Doc skirted around to the west side of the compound. Low-hanging branches and thick underbrush offered cover, but also slowed progress. They heard the new vehicles pull up, voices shouting in Spanish. The tension was palpable. If they didn't strike soon, they'd be facing far more adversaries than anticipated. Wade led the way to the weak spot in the fence Doc had identified. Sure enough, it was a shoddy repair job, likely overlooked during expansions. Keeping to the shadows, Wade used bolt cutters to silently snip a section of chain link. With deliberate care, they peeled it back, just enough to slip inside. They crouched in the darkness, behind a stack of crates that stood near the fence. Through a gap, they watched the main yard. Soldiers bustled around the recently arrived vehicles. A tall man stepped out of the lead SUV, well-dressed, exuding authority. Even at a distance, Wade sensed the fear he commanded. "That must be Eduardo Reyes," Wade murmured to Doc. Doc nodded grimly. "He's got bodyguards all around him." Wade keyed his radio twice, 2 short clicks, the signal to Rhino and Hawk that they were in position. The earpiece crackled back with 2 clicks in reply. "Let's create a diversion," Wade whispered. He handed Doc a flashbang, keeping another for himself. On his signal, they pulled the pins and lobbed the grenades into the yard. 2 blinding flashes and deafening bangs shattered the night. Cartel soldiers staggered, disoriented. A volley of suppressed gunfire from Rhino and Hawk came next, taking out several men who were exposed in the glare. Wade and Doc advanced, using the confusion to their advantage. Wade's suppressed carbine hissed, dropping 2 soldiers who fumbled for cover. Doc fired short, controlled bursts, taking down a third. Panic ensued in the yard as men shouted, fumbling with weapons, uncertain where the attack was coming from. Eduardo Reyes, regaining his senses, barked orders in rapid Spanish. Bodyguards closed ranks around him, returning fire at shadows. The night lit up with muzzle flashes, bullets ricocheting off crates and vehicles. 1 round whistled past Wade's ear, close enough that he felt its heat. A cluster of cartel soldiers regrouped near the large outbuilding, forming a defensive line. Wade tossed a smoke grenade, blanketing the area in a thick, gray cloud. He and Doc dashed forward under cover, pressing the advantage. Doc fired a burst, catching a gunman in mid-scream. Overwatch fire continued from Rhino and Hawk. Each shot from the ridge was precise, sniping any cartel gunner who broke away from cover. The synergy of the team's well-honed tactics bore down on the frantic cartel defenders. Yet they were still outnumbered. Soldiers poured from the lodge, adding to the chaotic firefight. Bullets tore through the smoke, some slamming into crates, others churning the dirt at Wade's feet. He ducked behind a toppled drum, wincing at the pain in his wounded shoulder, trying to steady his breathing. Through the haze, he glimpsed Eduardo Reyes, flanked by 2 bodyguards, heading toward the main lodge entrance, likely retreating inside. Wade nudged Document. "He's making a run for it." They moved to intercept. The bodyguards spotted them and opened fire, forcing Wade and Doc to dive behind a stack of crates. Splinters and metal shards flew. The smell of gunpowder and hot lead choked the air. Doc signaled that he'd provide cover. Wade nodded, mouthing on 3. They exchanged a quick countdown. At 3, Doc popped up, spraying suppressive fire. Wade sprinted forward, weaving and zigzagging to avoid return shots. He reached the lodge's stone wall, pressing himself flat against it. One bodyguard pivoted to track Wade's movement. A single shot rang out from the darkness. Hawk's sniper round took the guard through the temple, dropping him instantly. The other bodyguard spun, disoriented. Wade seized the opening, squeezing the trigger. The man fell with a strangled cry. Now only Eduardo Reyes stood, his expression a mix of rage and desperation. He darted inside, slamming the door. Wade motioned for Doc to follow. They advanced on the entrance, stepping over the dead bodyguard. Wade tried the lodge door. It was locked. Gunfire raged outside as the rest of the compound erupted in chaos. Inside, Eduardo Reyes was cornered, but he was also dangerous. Wade and Doc exchanged a grim look, ready to breach and face the cartel leader in a final confrontation. If they succeeded, they could break the cartel's hold on Ironwood Valley once and for all, or die trying. The heavy wooden door rattled under Wade's boot as he kicked it, testing its sturdiness. Locked and probably barricaded from inside. Gunshots and screams echoed from the yard behind them, a fierce reminder that time was running out. Doc nodded toward a nearby window. "We could breach through there." Wade agreed. They stepped carefully around the side of the lodge, where a small leaded glass window provided a dim view of the interior. Wade slammed the butt of his carbine against it, shattering the glass. He reached in, carefully knocking away the shards. Then he boosted Doc inside first, following close behind. They found themselves in a rustic dining area. Long wooden tables, old hunting trophies on the walls. Moonlight streamed in through windows, casting ominous shadows. The acrid stench of gunpowder and tension permeated the space. A single gunshot cracked the quiet, and a bullet splintered the wooden beam near Wade's head. He and Doc dove behind a large table, the sound of footsteps retreating deeper into the lodge. Eduardo was armed and waiting. Wade's earpiece crackled with Rhino's voice. "Area secure outside. Minimal resistance left. Need backup." "Negative," Wade whispered. "We'll handle Reyes. Keep the perimeter locked down." Doc peered over the table, scanning for movement. "He's headed toward the back rooms." They rose, creeping through the lodge, weapons at the ready. A set of footprints in the dust indicated a hallway leading to another room. Muffled breathing, tense and ragged, reached Wade's ears. Reyes was close. With a silent hand signal, Wade positioned Doc on one side of the corridor while he flanked the other. He lobbed a flashbang down the hall, its explosion lighting up the interior with a harsh burst. They charged in immediately, rifles sweeping the area. The hallway opened into a grand study, its walls lined with books and mounted animal heads. Eduardo Reyes crouched behind a massive oak desk, pistol in one hand. The flashbang had disoriented him, but not incapacitated. He fired wildly, rounds chewing into the walls. Wade and Doc took cover behind the door frame, bullets whipping past. Wade took a breath, adrenaline surging. He hurled himself forward, rolling to a knee behind a toppled bookshelf. Doc provided covering fire, forcing Reyes to duck. Wade pressed his advantage, firing a short burst that shattered the desk's surface. Splinters flew. Reyes yelped, diving to the floor. "Give it up," Wade barked. "It's over." A bitter laugh echoed from behind the desk. "You think killing me stops the cartel? We're everywhere." He popped up, pistol raised, eyes wild. Doc's reflexes were faster. He fired once, hitting Reyes in the shoulder. Reyes sprawled onto the desk, blood staining his expensive suit. But even wounded, his fury burned. With a trembling hand, he aimed again at Doc. Wade's shot was final and precise, hitting Reyes square in the chest. The cartel boss collapsed, gasping as he slid to the floor. His eyes locked on Wade, defiance mingling with disbelief. In those final seconds, he muttered, "You, Phantom, we will avenge." His words died with him. Blood pooled across the hardwood. Silence descended in the study. Doc exhaled, lowering his rifle. "He's done." Wade stared at the body, sweat mingling with the grime on his face. The man who had orchestrated the terror in Ironwood Valley, who had threatened countless lives, now lay lifeless. Adrenaline ebbed, leaving Wade's heart pounding. They confirmed Reyes was dead, then collected any documents, phones, or laptops scattered in the study. This might help the DEA dismantle what remained of the cartel's local network. A burst of static on their radios interrupted the hush. Rhino's urgent voice crackled through. "Multiple vehicles inbound from the north side of the compound. Look like cartel reinforcements or possibly more high-value targets. We need to clear out now." Wade and Doc exchanged a grave look. They'd neutralized Reyes, but the fight was far from over. Would they be able to escape the compound before the next wave of killers swarmed in? Wade's gut tightened at Rhino's warning. Fresh vehicles en route. Taking out Reyes was a significant blow, but if more cartel forces arrived, they could be overwhelmed. Outside, the firefight had largely subsided, but new enemies were closing fast. He motioned to Doc, pointing toward a side exit visible in the study. They hurried over only to discover it was locked. No time for finesse. Wade stepped back and kicked hard near the lock. The old wood splintered, the door flying open into a dim corridor. The corridor led into the main lodge's kitchen, a rustic setup with a stone fireplace and old iron pots hanging from hooks. A single door in the back likely opened onto a loading area or some sort of patio. They crept forward, rifles raised. Suddenly, movement in the corner. A cartel soldier sprang from behind a counter, brandishing a shotgun. He fired hastily, pellets shredding the wall above Wade's head. Doc returned fire, the assailant collapsing in a messy sprawl. The echo of the shotgun blast lingered. "Let's move," Wade urged. They pressed on, finding the back door. To their relief, it opened without resistance, revealing a small gravel lot on the lodge's rear side. The forest loomed beyond. They heard Rhino's voice again in the earpiece. "Hawk and I are pulling back from Overwatch. There's at least 2 more trucks of hostiles. They'll be on site any minute." "We're out the back," Wade responded. "We'll circle around and regroup by the vehicles." They dashed across the gravel lot, hugging the lodge's wall. The night air was sharp in their lungs, every sense on high alert. The occasional pop of distant gunfire suggested pockets of resistance remained inside the compound. As they neared the tree line, the roar of engines announced the arrival of more cartel reinforcements. Headlights swept across the compound's front area, illuminating scattered bodies and bullet-riddled SUVs. Shouts in Spanish reverberated as the newcomers realized they were too late to save Reyes or the majority of his men. Doc tossed a glance over his shoulder. "We gotta hurry." They plunged into the darkness of the forest. Branches snapped underfoot, but the dense canopy offered concealment. Within minutes, they spotted Rhino and Hawk crouched near an outcropping of rocks. Hawk raised his sniper rifle in greeting. "We need to exfil now. Too many tangos for us to handle." Rhino nodded grimly. "We parked half a mile back. Let's move." In single file, they trekked through the forest's shadows. Tension simmered, each minute of silence laden with the fear that cartel pursuers might catch their trail. But the night remained quiet aside from distant, angry voices from the compound. Eventually, they reached Rhino's truck, hidden beneath pine boughs. They piled in, removing branches from the hood and grill. Rhino ignited the engine, headlights off, carefully navigating the logging trail back to the main road. Only when they were several miles away did any of them breathe easier. The silhouettes of pine trees gave way to more open terrain. In the faint moonlight, Wade checked the documents and phones they had snatched from Reyes's study. Names, addresses, coded references to shipments. All invaluable intel for the DEA. Wade keyed his radio one more time, hailing Delgado. "Agent Delgado, come in." Static at first, then Delgado's voice, strained. "Thorne? Where are you?" Wade relayed their location and the success of the mission. Reyes was dead, the compound mostly cleared, but reinforcements had arrived. Delgado breathed a curse. "We're en route now with state troopers. Can you lead us there?" Rhino shook his head at Wade. They'd done their job. Handing over the site to official authorities was best. "We'll send the coordinates," Wade said into the radio. "It's your show now." As they drove deeper into the night, the gravity of what they'd done settled in. They had struck a decisive blow against the Reyes cartel in Ironwood Valley, but at the cost of revealing that a single farm wasn't just a farm. It was the lair of the deadliest Delta Force commander to ever serve. The repercussions of that revelation might echo far beyond Montana's borders. Dawn broke over Ironwood Valley with a gentle glow, a stark contrast to the violence of the preceding nights. Rhino's truck rumbled down the battered driveway leading to Wade's farm. When they arrived, the sight was sobering. Burnt hay bales, bullet-scarred fences, and a battered barn told the tale of the fierce battle. Wade hopped out, wincing at the twinge in his shoulder. Roscoe and Luna bounded from the farmhouse, tails wagging anxiously. He knelt to greet them, relief surging through him that they were unharmed. Rhino surveyed the wreckage, whistling low. "Damn, brother, your place took a beating." Doc rubbed the back of his neck. "We can help you rebuild. The least we can do after dragging you into a war." Wade's expression was weary but resolute. "I appreciate that. The important thing is we stopped them." He was right. The core leadership of the Reyes cartel operation in Montana was now decapitated, their compound in law enforcement hands. The surviving members would face the DA's wrath, armed with the intel Wade had handed over. They gathered in the living room, nursing cups of strong coffee. Outside, the flashing lights of a sheriff's cruiser signaled the arrival of Adam Hawthorne. The sheriff stepped in, hat in hand, looking grim as he took stock of the bullet holes and shattered windows. "Wade," Adam began, "I've been to the compound. Delgado and his people are rounding up stragglers. You guys really did a number on them." Rhino, Hawk, and Doc lingered in the background, letting Wade speak. Wade gave a curt nod. "Needed doing. They would have destroyed the valley, Adam." Adam exhaled, shaking his head. "I'm not even sure how to file a report on all this. DEA is classifying it under joint operation, but the official line will be that local and federal agents dismantled the cartel. Your names might be kept out, given the sensitivities." Wade offered a tired smile. "That's probably best." Adam tipped his hat. "Thank you. Ironwood Valley won't forget this. If you need anything, just say the word." As Adam left, Rhino exchanged a look with Wade. Time for us to head out too, he said. I trust you can handle the cleanup? Wade grasped Rhino's hand firmly.